Welcome back to the official Big Bang Theory podcast. I am your host, Jessica Radloff. The importance of our next guest cannot be overstated for the impact that he has had on television. He is one of the most recognized production designers in all of television. A little show called Friends, you might have heard of, 2.5 Men, Mom, The Drew Carey Show, Dharma and Greg, and oh yes, The Big Bang Theory for 12 seasons. He also won the Art Directors Guild Award 3 times in a row for The Big Bang Theory. And he also worked on a little show called The Golden Girls, mind you. I mean, what this guy has done, it just transcends everything. I'm so thrilled to have him on the podcast today. His name is John Shaffner. He was the production designer for The Big Bang Theory. And John, it is such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here because, I always loved the work that I was able to do because of all the people that were involved and the joy and pleasure of getting to read a script and imagining, what it looks like. People often ask me, what is a production designer? And it's kind of complicated, but not really. In the old days, we were called art directors. And to get the title of production designer, you had to write a special letter. The producers had to write a letter to the union. And the union had a meeting once a month. And the board of directors would vote on whether or not you should get that credit. And so it was invented for William Cameron Menzies, who had worked on Gone with the Wind. That's when they invented production designer credit. But the years go by, and slowly the control of the credit was essentially lost by the union because so many shows, non-union or whatever, would just start using the title production designer in place of the name art director. But I always describe the job as production designer is I got to be the first person, usually before even sometimes a director, to read a script and start that process of imagining what it's going to look like. Where is this taking place? What are these rooms, spaces, environment, world that these characters inhabit? What does it look like?
I love that description. Since you said you get to often see the scripts before anybody else does, walk me back, which is appropriate for this episode we're going to talk about, which is, as I call, the time machine episode. Walk me back to that first day when you got a script for The Big Bang Theory. What did you think?
Well, for the time machine episode, the first thing I got was, the time machine. Are we going to have to build it? Or please, holy mother, there must be one for rent somewhere, because this would be a very elaborate thing to try to duplicate, especially if you don't have the original accessible to you to make the final measurements, check your colors and do that work, which really, if we were in the feature movie business, you would have a month, 6 weeks time to do it in. But if we have 10 days in this situation, as I recall, there was really no way that we could manufacture one. So the first thing I would do immediately on the script is I'd call I think of Faye Oshima at the time and say, Faye, we can't build this in time. So what's the plan here? So we had a meeting with transportation, the property department, legal, of course, because, okay, just because you wrote it doesn't mean we can use it, and Faye. And so pretty soon the prop department took over in that world because they had the access to a lot of phone numbers of people who support the studio system with the small things. Because essentially props are supposed to be anything that an actor handles.
Right.
So to speak, like briefcases and eyeglasses and food and all of those things. So this time machine was kind of like many of the things we did on Big Bang, robots and stuff, where we had to find a place in the middle, but we also had to find a way to actually get it done.
Yes.
So I have tremendous love for the prop team on the show who found this. So that was like, it was kind of, towards the end, we were starting to perspire a little bit. And we got word that we were able to rent it and we were legally able to use it. But then, of course, at the same time, there was a discovery process about how this time machine was going to make it into the building. And I don't know if it's been spoken about, but one of the specific things that Chuck asked us to do when we did the pilot was to create stairways for the characters to walk up and down so that we could have material that wasn't just trapped in the apartment or on a landing. It would be on the stairs. He wanted this sense of motion in conversation because that's a natural thing. We walk and we talk. And so in order to do that, of course, we built the whole set and I built a hallway, and Chuck came down to the stage and went, I thought we were going to have a stairway going down. And I said, well, the studio, you can't cut a hole on a soundstage at Warner Brothers. It's sort of like not permitted. And Chuck, being very aggressive and positive, said, oh, yes, we can. And so we were able to cut the hole in the stage and build the staircase that went down. The elevator, so they arrive with this time machine. Now, one of the challenges is when you start a series, you're going like, where are we going with this? And all of a sudden we learn that we have to see the lobby of the building. So we don't have any space on the stage for outside the door, except for a backdrop and a few feet and a plant. So they have to bring it through the door. So I say, try to pick up the scene as soon as the door is closed. Don't show them trying to get it through the door. I tell the director that. And so, okay. So they get it in there and they begin the process of taking it up the stairs in the set that was the lobby of the apartment building. And then they, brought it around and we saw it then coming up the stairs towards their apartment. So, just maneuvering that machine, we didn't have to rebuild the stairway any wider. It just fit. So sometimes luck is on our side.
Yes. I want to first ask you, do you take such pride in knowing that the elevator in Big Bang and the stairs have become so iconic to this series, and that is your doing? I know Chuck wanted to drill a hole in the studio stage at Warner Brothers in order to create this set, but it was because of you that we have this elevator that everybody knows about now, that's on the cover of my book, that has become such a plot device. What does that mean to you when you see that? Do you think like, wow, that was me that came up with that? I know it's a collaborative effort, but John, this was you. It was rather selfish because I really couldn't think of what we could hang on that stupid wall. There's nothing worse than a hallway with a little console table and a picture. And you go like, well, what picture would that be? Because it's going to be there all the time. Mm-hmm. Or do we put a flower arrangement? Or do we put magazines? Do we put a newspaper? Do we put a trash can? What do you do with a wall? You can make a niche. It didn't make any sense to have a window, although maybe we could have had an air shaft, but then that didn't seem right for this building. I mean, It was just everything. The only thing I could think of the only thing that would really be there would be an elevator, and they lived in an older building, but that would have had an elevator. Right. So, it was necessity because of my imagination and my, education. But at the same time, when you see it and you go like, I think this could be useful. Let's see what they do with it. It's almost kind of like I threw it down and say, here, what can you do with this? Have some fun. I mean, the greatest joy is building the sandbox and letting them play in it. And I often said that at a presentation of a pilot there, your sandbox is built, go have fun. Yes. And so I do have pride in it, but it's a humble pride. I mean, I really, I was inspired by the writing. I was inspired by the story from the moment, when they shifted gears from the first pilot to the second pilot. And I'll never forget that phone call. I don't know if anyone has mentioned this story, but I got a phone call from Chuck, from his assistant. John, Chuck needs you to come over. We need to talk about the Big Bang Theory. And I go, okay. I said, I knew we were picked up to do another pilot. And he walked into the room, and Chuck sometimes says something before you even have a chance to sit down. He just looked at me and said, I got to tell you, John, the set was all wrong.
And then I go like, and he said, don't worry, it wasn't your fault. I could have kissed him then.
Good.
And then he was like, he said, we wrote something, you gave us what we asked for, but now we got to make the show like it fits in the CBS time slot. We're not going to worry about money. They're not rich. Now they're professors, but money is not what this show's about. And I said, okay, we'll find that level where we believe they live comfortably, but they don't live above their means and they don't live below. We don't want to feel sorry for them. We want to feel good about being with them.
Right.
So it's that, when you start getting into a story, you just want to be part of the story as best you can when you're in love with the story.
Absolutely. By the way, I saw that you had actually designed a version of the set for the second pilot, the set that we pretty much now know and love and have memorized for years. And it was this like 3D model that you created. Where is that? Is that in your house now, or does the props department or the archives have it?
The archives have the final version of the paper model, but it's an interesting story. There was one paper model that I had made their apartment a little bigger, maybe with a staircase that went to an outdoor somewhere and things. And then Chuck said, no, bring it down a little bit. So I, did this and I built the paper model, and the paper model sat in my office year after year collecting dust. And finally, there was somebody, they wanted to borrow it on stage for something. And it went down to the stage, and then it disappeared, and nobody knew what had happened to it. And all of a sudden, we get a phone call from a prop house in North Hollywood saying, we realized we have the model for the Big Bang Theory here. Do you want it back? I said, yes, please. So I drove out to North Hollywood to this big giant warehouse, and the people said, oh, here. And they showed me the room, and it was there with a bunch of other junk. And I said, welcome home, baby. And I took it back, and I got out my air duster, and cleaned it up a little bit, and we kept it in our office. And then when it was time for the show to wrap, we carefully boxed it up, and it was all turned over along with all of the drawings and a number of other models that went with the show. And so that's how it has been saved. I have a copy of the drawings, and I often think I ought to really make another model just so I have one at my house to show people. But I've never gotten around to it. And then, of course, over the years, I thought, geez, since the show really lasted, I should make another model and give it to Chuck. But he's got a lot of stuff already. There comes a point. He's got pictures. But it was a story that was kind of amusing that it went away and came back. It found its way home.
Oh, my goodness. Well, if you want to make an extra one for us, we'll put it here on this set, and we'll put it in a little spinning, Lazy Susan, and we'll just have it go around the entire time.
This is before really a lot of the programs, shall we call them, that are available for your computer to make quality illustration work that you can turn things and you can look at it from multiple directions. And so this was really in the era still where I found the best way to communicate an environment was to first solve the geography and the architecture with a white model. And so we would build the white model and have the meetings and maybe do 2 or 3 revisions, little things usually, like maybe we could have another door there or something. And we would go and I would start doing colors. And usually in a pilot, then I'd come in with a color board and presentation. And this show, Chuck was getting a little worried about maybe not being too colorful. He kind of wanted things let's keep it calm down.
Right.
And so it was a very neutral palette. In the boys' department, I chose a fairly warm color. And then when we went to Penny, we had to deal with the fact that basically all the boys had dark hair, and now we have blonde Penny. So I was a little anxious about doing too warm a color because her blonde hair wouldn't be very well defined.
Right.
So we moved her into the pale, soft gray, blue-green world a little bit, and so each character you kind of had to go with, okay, this is a color identification that works best with their skin and hair. The boys' apartment, when she was there, obviously a lot,
Right.
had enough decoration in it that she really never blended into that pale, soft, warm, creamy color that I did for the walls.
Right. The first pilot, though, was very dark in its aesthetic, especially compared to the second pilot and then obviously what remained. Were you really happy when you got a chance to do it again? I know you were scared at first when Chuck said, we're going to rip it all out and do it all over again. But was there a part of you that was like, I'm actually excited to get a second chance to discover what we could do here?
When I had the new directives and when I read the script, I knew right away that the characters were going to be much more accessible to the audience, to all of us. It was a little off-putting in the pilot, the very first pilot, about how they had no money and they were on the street and they were going to the sperm bank, right. And then they were going to be, and they lived in this horrible rooming house with junk furniture that was we had fun making it really look kind of junky and desperate. But when you stood back and looked at it, you kind of go, is this where the audiences want to come every week? And I think that's what Nina Tassler and her team also came to the conclusion of, it's like, this won't be funny.
Right.
And our goal is to have fun and make it funny. We can make it very poignant, but we have to have a sense of, there's a level of comfort that you want. And that other pilot was a little uncomfortable in a way.
Exactly. No, I think that's the best way to put it. We
moved it into a space that was comfortable, and then I drove all over, Pasadena and around Caltech to look for apartment buildings. I spent a day taking pictures until I could finally, Pasadena, 20s and 30s, 40s, a lot of development, brick apartment buildings started to happen. Then there was buildings that were repurposed. So this building was a little bit maybe repurposed because it had the big window in the back. It was an older building, which older architecture is oftentimes a lot warmer than contemporary styles.
Right.
I couldn't imagine these guys living in a plain old apartment. They wanted to be someplace kind of architecturally interesting. Because then Anne, she took it from there to do fun things like the coffee table, which was a big gear with a piece of glass on it, Right. And, we did put a work drafting table upstage and computer stuff. And then she started filling it with the knickknacks that had to do with the characters liking comic book stuff. And we kept adding, levels to that, especially once we got rolling. I always think that one of the reasons this show was so successful was that they had a long period of gestation from when we did that first pilot to when we did the second pilot. And even the second pilot was postponed a couple of months until they could find the actress to play Penny.
Right.
And so when they finally settled on Kaley and we got the go ahead, all of us who had worked on the show had really ingested and understood the characters, especially Johnny and Jim.
Yeah.
They really had a lot of time to think about what they were going to be portraying. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I went on a sidetrack there.
No, I can listen to your stories forever. I love it so much. In the episode with the time machine, which we were talking about a little earlier, it is season 1, episode 14. We haven't mentioned it yet. The Nerdvana Annihilation. Of course, the time machine episode, as we all call it. And I love that you've already touched so much on the elevator and the stairway. I remember when I was on set years ago, I did a video of myself walking up the stairs because that was the number one question people would always ask me is, well, how many levels are there, and where does the staircase lead to? And where does it go to? And, how do they do this? So I would like you to explain to all of our listeners, how big was that staircase? Where did it go? How much room did the actors have at the bottom and then at the top? And what was that? Give us your best visual explanation of what it looked like for someone that never got to see it up close.
We built the stairs the way they're supposed to be so you could walk up and down them. And then we stood back where cameras would go to make sure that we couldn't see the bottom of the stairs, but we didn't make them any deeper than we had to. And we just extended the walls in the back all the way down to the ground as if, the stairs kept going.
Right.
But there really was very little space there. And on the stairs going up, we just took that up to a half of a landing where there was a small platform with a little stairway that went down to the backstage. So when they made an entrance coming down, they'd have to go backstage. But lots of times the performers would just run up and down the front steps while we were on camera. It wasn't like a play where we had to wait for them to be a surprise walk down.
Right.
But once you reach the bottom of the stairs, did you go around the corner and duck underneath the platform?
I did not, and I should have.
You would find a wall of chewing gum.
Okay, that I knew about. I knew the chewing gum was there. Yes.
Everybody, performers, of course, are, it's intimate conversation, and you want to have, you don't want to have halitosis, if that's the word. And so so everybody chews gum on stage or takes mints. And so they'd and stick it on the wall and come up the stairs. So that always cracked me up. I hadn't discovered that, once it all worked and I went up and down and checked for safety, it's like, fine, I don't need to do that again. And then one time I was giving some friends a tour and I said, well, I'll come down the stairs, and then, oh my God, there's all this gum. The intimate lies. There was a lot of DNA on that wall.
I bet there was. I just want to see a photo of you in a hard hat with Chuck and a bunch of shovels. Like back in the very beginning when you guys were digging. I mean, I know the Warner Brothers, construction team had a role in this, but I just picture you and Chuck and Bill and whoever else down there with shovels and hard hats just digging.
No, that would never happen. Chuck would say, John, the stairs have to go down. I said, well, we can't do that because of Warner Brothers. Oh, yes, we can. Okay. Next day, the phone rings. Yes, you can. So I met construction, the incredible Rick Puccio, coordinator on this. And he just went, okay, fine. And the next day we came back and we started building the stairs. I said, how far can we go? And they said, well, dig a little more. And we got it done. And, Chuck that would be it. And I'll, call me when it's done. So, yes. He was really good about staying out of your hair until it was done, and then he would maybe mess your hair up.
It's one of the many reasons why we love him. Going back to The Time Machine, this was actually based on a movie called The Time Machine from 1960, I believe. Were you familiar with the movie when you got the script that this is what the guys would be doing?
Oh, yes.
You were.
I had seen that movie when I was younger. I think I'd seen it a couple of times. I wasn't a maniac about it, but I'd always thought it was, a cool thing. I always thought the machine was a little scary, to tell you the truth, especially when you saw where it took you in the H.G. Wells story.
Yes.
That the film was based on. But, I was very aware, but that's why I was so taken aback when they're like, what? They've written the time machine in? Where the heck are we going to get that? Because we can't build it.
I love it. Well, yeah. I'm so glad you said that the thing was a little scary. One of my favorite lines in this episode is uttered by Penny. And I want to listen to that clip of what she thinks of this time machine when she first lays eyes on it. Let's listen to this clip. But remember, you can find the full episode on Max.
How could you waste your lives with these stupid toys and costumes and comic books and now that?
Again, time machines.
Oh, please, it's not a time machine. If anything, it looks like something Elton John would drive through the Everglades.
I just love that. Something that Elton John would drive through the Everglades.
If I recall correctly, and that was the line that kind of came about during the rehearsal process. I have nothing. I've had nothing. And I've written and I've told Chuck this. for respect for the discipline that he and his writers had for delivering a script that you didn't have to panic attack about and go, God, they got to totally rewrite this because it's crappy. We always had a really wonderful foundation to start with good lines in it. But part of that rehearsal process is discovery. And I have a feeling that when, the writers saw the machine and they saw Penny and they're scrambling and they need that punch, to the scene that the end, it came to them. And, I just watched it and I laughed here. It made me laugh. It was like she so got their characters, and then they were so mortified because all Johnny wants is to make her his girlfriend, for years and years. It just hung on.
I know. Speaking of, did you know at the time, and this is what I found so fascinating in the book, is that Kaley and Johnny did a bunch of Zooms together with me. And Kaley said that the scene in the elevator when Leonard is having this dream that he pulls open the elevator doors and he grabs her and he's like, he goes from Clark Kent to Superman, has her in his arms, says, baby, hold on. She said, that's when I started to fall a little bit in love with Johnny. She was crushing on him so hard. She said, I was bright red in that scene. You have to go back and watch it because she was freaking out. Did you know that she was crushing on him? And what did you think when you were watching them either rehearse the scene or do it on tape night? Because she couldn't wait to be out of his arms because she had such a crush on him.
I think we saw their relationship go from her crushing kind of to a really deep friendship. And there was something in that moment that when she turned and kissed him on, at that moment, that you just kind of went, there's some truth here that we don't really expect, but there's a level that is more than performance in a weird kind of way to describe it. And I think it resulted in a moment where we watched a rehearsal, the run through, and then once again in the audience where the stage was dead silent. I mean, it was this little moment of magic that you're not quite sure just what happened because it's more real than maybe you think it should be. I mean, It's just, yes. And so, yes, I think, yes. I mean, we didn't walk out and say, oh, she must be in love with Johnny. But at that moment you go like, there's an affection here that we'll wonder where that's going a little bit,
Yeah. Did the audience watch that in playback mode on stage, or was that done live in front of them? Because there were so many technical elements. Like you said, they had to be kind of squatting in order to make it look like Johnny was really hanging on to these ropes. I mean, Johnny, listen, he's not that tall, but he's very muscular. And he's athletic, and he looks like he's holding on to Penny with one arm as he's being lowered down in the elevator shaft. But we know that's obviously not the case. So how many times did you do that either live in front of the studio audience, or had you pre-taped that?
I think it was, my recollection isn't clear, but here's what we generally would do in a situation like this is definitely record it ahead of time.
Yeah.
So we could make sure it was flawlessly done. And the actors were very good at that. But I would think, and I may be mistaken, that they would have done it at least once, if not twice, in front of the live audience. Because this is what Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball discovered. In front of a live audience in the theater, you get those reactions that feed the performance. And so that's why I think, it heightens it a little bit.
Right.
So, but sometimes you get a better take in a pre-take. But it seems to me they would have done this scene if they had practiced it and rehearsed it and had it for sure. Mm-hmm. Then they would go ahead and give it a go in front of the audience just to see the reaction. So I don't know which take they took. I'm sorry.
How dare you not know? I mean, go back, what, now it's 17
It went in
years?
editing. I don't, call me if you're trying to pick out an establishing shot. Please don't use establishing shots. They never match.
Listen, as I was doing the book, I'd often be like, why weren't you all keeping a diary? Because, everybody's memories, things start to blend together. It's very hard. Nobody thinks, back in 2007 or 2008, when a show is just trying to get off the ground and there's a writer's strike, no one thinks it's going to go for 12 years and there's eventually going to be a book and a podcast and all this. But now I tell them, write every single thing down. We need to know all of these details. Later in the episode, Sheldon has a dream or a nightmare, whatever you want to call it, where he is sitting in the time machine. By the way, I do want to know, though, did you ever sit in the time machine on set? Did you take a photo in it?
Oh, I'm sure. I don't have a picture of me on it, but everybody took a turn on it. But because it was a rented thing, we were pretty ginger about. We didn't want to damage it in any way because, that could get everybody into unhappiness land.
Right.
But that when Sheldon had his fantasy and the script came through on that, it was like a reflection on the original movie and doing the jungle for him. And this is really where we, have a chance to really collaborate with the director of photography and his gaffer and best boy electricians where, all right, what will make this look really spooky? And so Steve and I would, visit a little bit about that. I'd say, here's what we've got. You can do what you can to make this as spooky as you can. Are you thinking some blue light maybe? And, he would have a lot of fun. I mean, when any of us had a chance to do something a little out of the ordinary, it kind of gave us a little bump of creativity, shall we say, and to collaborate together. I am always was in awe of our costumer, Mary's work.
Yes, Mary T. Quigley
Was extraordinary. And how she helped these characters, these actors, find their roles from the very beginning was absolutely brilliant. And I am sorry she was never recognized for the work officially with Emmy stuff or whatever, but right. That's another sausage that I saw made. So I'm going to talk about that. But she, I have a long time good acquaintance, Ann Roth, who's a 90-year-old Broadway movie designer.
Yes.
And she's very close to Meryl Streep. And, Meryl and anybody who's worked with Ann Roth, or with Carol Burnett's relationship with Bob Mackie that
yes.
also is famous, that they would walk in with an idea of the character, and then when they started putting the clothes on, they started understanding the character that much better. And then the next step is when they walk into the set, and because they haven't had any contribution at all, that no one has asked them what they like, what color they want, what they think the set should be. Zero. Stay out of my hair. And so when they walk in, and you hope that they walk in and go, oh, now I get it.
Yes.
And that this show really went beautifully that way with what Mary did and with what we did with our environments.
1,000%. And by the way, I'm so glad you brought up Ann Roth, because how great was it to see her cameo in Warner Brothers motion picture Barbie in 2023 with Margot Robbie.
God.
Amazing.
She's a delight, absolute delight.
She's wonderful.
She's also an alum from Carnegie Mellon University, but from much before I was, but not that so long. But I mean, yes. And then we have some very dear friends who are friends with her. So whenever she was in LA, we'd always have dinner and things like that. So
I love that. Well, we're going to play a little game now to test your Big Bang Theory knowledge and see how you do. I've got faith in you, John. I've got a lot of faith. You ready?
Okay.
Okay. What is Sheldon's middle name?
I don't know.
It's Lee. Sheldon Lee Cooper.
Okay.
I'll give you that one. What state did Penny live in before moving to Pasadena?
Kansas or Nebraska?
Nebraska.
Okay.
Well done. What school did Howard attend?
Oh, I don't remember. I know I'm making a guess.
Okay, guess.
Was he from California? I don't think so.
But I love your guessing face.
I think someplace in New Jersey?
We're getting closer on the East Coast.
East Coast?
Yeah.
MIT?
Well done. Yes.
Okay.
MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Right.
What is the breed of Raj's dog, Cinnamon?
Oh, wasn't that a dachshund? No.
No.
It was a terrier of some kind.
The Yorkshire Terrier.
Yorkshire Terrier. I was going to say silky, but.
And finally, can you spell Koothrappali?
Koothrapli.
Close. So close, John.
So close.
So close. It's 2 P's. 2 P's, 1 L.
2 P's.
You were missing that final P.
And I know I had to write that down on Koothrappali's set, or,
Don't worry, Milaro couldn't remember it one time either, so you're in very good company. It was a pleasure to have you on for the Nerdvana Annihilation, aka the Time Machine episode. I found this so fascinating.
Well, I strayed a lot from that specific episode, but at the same time, I was proud of that episode because that was a elevator thing and the fantasy worlds of the Time Machine. And I also liked it that every once in a while, the writers would write very close to what we used to call a bottle show, where we didn't have to build a lot of new sets for the episode. And so it usually meant a week that wasn't going to be stressful because basically they were working within the sets that existed.
Yeah.
So those were always, we got that script and went, okay, other than the Time Machine, this one should be easy. Oh, the jungle will be fun, but at the same time, I love the fact that it really explored how they had to use the set. And of course, they had his bedroom in it for a little bit too.
They did.
So, and I don't remember when we first introduced his bedroom. I think it was a few episodes earlier, but it was sort of that was one show where we didn't know about whether bedrooms were going to be important or not, which they really didn't. They were a little bit now and then,
right? But
they were down the hall. So we didn't have to have the door. There was one door in the main living apartment upstage of the built-in bookcase that was a glass door. And it was originally designed because the character of Penny had no place to go, or she had to go to the bathroom. I forget which. And so I made it a frosted glass door because the boys were supposed to be really nervous that a pretty girl was that close with just nothing but a frosted glass between them. That was why that was a frosted glass door there. And then it sort of became a closet, I think is what happened.
Wow. That's so, little details like that. They're so fascinating to know about.
Well, and I don't remember, I haven't watched the pilot in a long, if they kept that bit in, but originally it was in the script, so that I had to provide a door that would make them be outside the door and be panicked.
Right.
And I thought the frosted glass should make them more panicked.
That's so great. No, they were definitely panicked in that pilot episode that aired because they could not believe that especially Leonard, and then eventually Howard too, that there was this gorgeous girl who was in a towel who was right there in the bathroom. And I think there's jokes about grandparents or something having been the last to use that as a guest. So no, you're very accurate on that.
Yeah. Okay. Because I don't think they hardly ever use that door again.
Well, it was an important scene for a door, so well done.
Yes.
Well done.
It was there.
I love that. John, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great fun to talk about and have these wonderful memories.
I'm so glad.
This podcast was produced by Warner Brothers Unscripted Television in partnership with Max.